Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I welcome you to this seminar entitled Building India's Technology and Semiconductor Industries, Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Policy. And I'm particularly delighted that we can welcome Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar to be part of our seminar today, or actually be the main part of the seminar today, I should say. And as most of you are familiar, Mr. Chandrasekhar is the former Minister of State for Electronics and Information Technology, Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, and Jal Shakti in India. So welcome, Mr. Chandrasekhar.
Thank you.
Mr. Chandrasekhar has held a distinguished career across engineering, entrepreneurship, skill development, investment, and public service in India and abroad. And he can provide unique insights into India's technological journey thus far, its future trajectories, and also perhaps share his thoughts on the challenges that India will have to negotiate both regionally, domestically, regionally, but also globally as well. India has witnessed a drastic technological transformation. This is reflected in the exponential growth of India's digital economy. And if any of you are in various parts of India, you can feel this on an everyday basis as well. But we living in Singapore as well, we feel the digital connectivity with India here as well, given the fact that UPI is now connected to the PayNow system. But looking ahead, India's technological future will be shaped by new aspects to this development. These include AI, quantum computing, semiconductors, etc. But as India negotiates its future steps in the technological and digital space, there is a global environment that India is not immune from. And here I'm referring to the era of perhaps what we can describe as techno-geopolitics. Access to critical technologies is increasingly contingent upon and shaping global influence, national security, and economic resilience. Semiconductors in particular have emerged as both the foundational enabler and strategic imperative in this geopolitical space. The global chip shortage during the pandemic exposed vulnerabilities in supply chains while also underscoring the urgency for nations like India to reduce dependency and invest in domestic innovation. India is positioning itself to become a key player in the global semiconductor manufacturing and design sector. And as many of us are familiar, India has a large workforce which can be trained, which can be educated to take up these jobs, thus ensuring that the demographics of India is a demographic dividend. But there are challenges as well that we need to grapple with. These include infrastructure bottlenecks, supply chain dependencies, as well as the need to have targeted policy reform and large-scale capital mobilization. It's of course not unique to India, but we will have a uniquely Indian perspective today. This seminar will focus on issues ranging from innovation, entrepreneurship, and public policy, and how these can converge to overcome the challenges India needs to overcome to meet its aims in the technological and semiconductor spheres. And we'll look at how India can align industrial policy, regulatory frameworks, and strategic investments to create a competitive edge in this high-stakes sector. And as I mentioned earlier, I can think of no better person than Mr. Chandrasekhar to provide his insights to this, because he is uniquely placed as he's led several key ministries relating to technology, skill development, and entrepreneurship, but he also understands the semiconductor space from the perspective of both an engineer and a policymaker, and is currently actively engaged in enabling the startup-led innovation that's spreading in India. So with that, Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours.
Right. So thank you for the welcome. Thank you for having me over to speak. It's been a little while since I spoke tech, because the last 2 months I've been busy in politics in Kerala. So it's always a welcome change to come back and speak about things that I'm deeply passionate about and extremely excited and interested in. So obviously this is a broad topic, and if you let me speak, then I won't stop, and we can go on and on. But I'll try and limit myself to these 30 minutes that I've been given, and I'll touch on 4 broad topics. One is, where are we in tech as a world? What is the broad ecosystem, global ecosystem on tech? What is it looking like? The changes. What has India's journey been in the last 10 years? And what I believe are the challenges and opportunities in this very rapidly changing landscape. So 4 broad it is, and then I'm happy to have a conversation and take questions or comments as the case may be. So for those who know tech, and I certainly can, if not anything else, lay claim to the fact that I know a little bit about tech. I've been around the block, the tech block, for about 3.5 decades, and have seen many super cycles of tech. And so we are living currently in what is certainly going to be one of the deepest, most disruptive super cycles of technology, the arc of which which has just started recently in the last 2 years, and it's going to be around for a few more years before it plays itself out and before it stabilizes. So anybody who tells you that the dust has settled and the winners and losers have been picked and chosen and the battle is over, or the shifts have done, is telling you nonsense. This is early days. And so whatever the Kool-Aid that is being fed or dribble dabbed by the couple of American platforms is exactly that. It's Kool-Aid. We are at very, very early stages of an extremely deep super cycle that is going to change and alter compute as we know it, is going to change and alter digital as we know it, and is going to change and alter essentially how businesses operate and how economies function and where the opportunities are going to be in the future. So I just wanted to tell you that. I think everybody here, I understand, as a scholar, the trajectory in tech has never been linear, not in recent years. It has been exponential. And so knowing fully well that in the recent years, recent decades, it has been exponential. You can just, imagine that exponential curve, the rate of change being even more dramatic and deep. So that is what is going to be the landscape in the coming years. Now, the word change and the word disruption, the word deep, all of these have been used in the context of AI, and are used sometimes loosely, sometimes to get attention. But what that means is, as I said, it will mean changes in the way countries' economies function. It will mean changes in the way countries' governments function. And what is not understood or not debated enough is that it is going to have very, very deep changes, or at least impacts. I don't want to say changes, on culture, behavior, underpinning of society as we know it today, deep behavioral changes and normalizations of what is right and wrong. What we saw with social media will look like a walk in the park when AI plays itself out. So these are going to be very, very deep, multifaceted changes, not just about tech and innovation, not just about who's the next unicorn or the billionaire, but also having great, deep societal impact. And one of the aspects of that is going to be, of course, geopolitical. So that is the first point that I just wanted to lay out and sensitize about the times that we are living in. And as somebody who has, been privileged and honored to have seen many of these tech cycles, when I'm asked, I only say I wish I was 30 years younger, because this is certainly the most exciting time to be an entrepreneur. This is the most exciting time to be a tech practitioner. The other aspect of this, which is the second point, and which is really not so much of a second point as in the first point, is that there is a growing change in the way tech is being built. Until 2021, the world, in a sense, collaborated to build tech. Every super cycle, whether it was the compute cycle, whether it's the internet and connectivity cycle, whether it is the software, the explosion of software and open source software, wasn't limited to a geography. It started in many cases in the Valley, in the US, in Europe, but very quickly became a global phenomenon. And multilateralism is the technical phrase I know in think tanks like yourself. But really, in a commonsensical way, if you look at it, it has always been a global collaboration that has been the catalyst for this growth of all of these super cycles. But post 2021, there is certainly a lot more awareness, especially from the principal pole of tech for all these decades, the US, that their open society and then their democracy and their education and an academic system lent itself to proliferation of tech, uh, albeit in the civilian space, in a manner that was altering the balance of tech leadership that they had assumed it was unchallenged for many, many years and decades. And in simple terms, what it means is what we used to think was proliferation of tech, where it was missiles or nuclear bombs or what AQ Khan did, or was actually also happening very happily happening in telecom, in next generation routers, silicon, semiconductors, and many, many things that were considered to be non-mil or non-military in its application were civilian and were much more um, easily proliferated. And that essentially in the recent years has caused a reimagining or change in the way technology used to be led. I'll just put it that way. I mean, I think those around the table are subtle and nuanced enough to understand what I mean. But so that was the second change. So post 2021, there was a realization or a reawakening to this concept of tech sovereignty and tech ownership. Who owns tech today? Who will own the tech of tomorrow? Who will shape and architect the future of the internet and future of the landscape as we know it in tech? So that is the second broad point that I think anybody who wants to understand history of tech and is trying to extrapolate into the future needs to understand. Then there is third, an extremely important point about India's role in this. Now, pre-2014, if you had told me, and I had spent by that time 25 years in tech, if you had told me that India would be a player in semiconductors and India would be legitimately around the round table discussing the future of AI, or India would be legitimately talking about future systems and deep tech, I would have laughed you out of the room. Because pre-2014, our footprint in the digital economy, the global digital innovation economy, was that we had a lot of IT capabilities, which is loosely referred to as IT, but effectively what that meant was we were the back office to many, many companies and enterprises and governments around the world. But if in a sense, when it came to tech, we were consumers of tech. We were adding value in some ways in the IT and ITES space, but the original IP ownership, the original tech sovereignty, if you want to call it that, lay with countries other than India. And so we were, if you want to say generously put, we were talent providers to those who were building systems, platforms, products around the world and solutions around the world. But post 2014 to now, if you measure where India is at today, and then I'll explain how we got here. We are certainly today, we have planted the flag, and that will only grow in the semiconductor ecosystem. And for 70, 75 years, India was completely zeroed out of that ecosystem. We had no role in it at all. We are today $100 billion, if not today, by 2030, we'll be importing $100 billion of semiconductors. And neither in design, neither in manufacture, neither in packaging, neither in the characterization testing were we anywhere in that whole value chain or the supply chain for semiconductors. That has significantly changed. And if you look forward to the next 4 years, we will have a minimum of 3 fabs, legacy nodes 28 nanometer and above. We will have significant know-how and capability and units doing packaging, cutting edge packaging. And in the obviously the highest value space today outside of manufacturing, which is design and innovation of fabless companies, we had zero to nobody in about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And we have almost 30 companies today that are engaged in various controllers and chips and devices that they are designing to be manufactured in India and outside as well. So I use that as an example to tell you that our capabilities in India between 14 and 25 have tremendously, deeply expanded to cover the existing sweet spot of supplying talent and being the IT provider to many companies and governments and countries, to also building original brands, original IP, original products, original devices, original platforms and solutions. And so we are in a spot today where we used to be, the digital economy used to be about 4.5 to 5% of the GDP in 2014. And by 2027 will be a fifth of the GDP. That is the target. It was 2026, but we are 1 year behind target. So the idea is that we would touch about $1 trillion when in digital and innovation, when the GDP reaches 5 trillion. We are the fourth largest economy in the world today. And at 5 trillion, we will be fourth or maybe a third. But important piece of that will be that a fifth of that, or close to a fifth of that economy, will come out of this space. That is innovation, deep tech, and technology. So that's the third point I wanted to make. And the last point is really a continuation of what I said when I started, which is even as we are living in the most exciting times of tech, and even as I say reasonably confidently that India and its presence in this global tech supply chain, value chain will be a significant one. The contest for tech that we will see in the coming years, and look, I'm not hoping that this will happen, but this is what I see, will be unlike anything that we have seen in the past. In the past, there was no contest. There was really an unspoken sort of a rule that innovation should flourish, innovation should see no boundaries, and countries and talent from across countries can collaborate and build the best product, the best solution, but the best idea can be built. But tech sovereignty is not only a new concept, but it's a real issue. And many countries are grappling with it. Let me tell you, one of the consequences of that is really what used to be an old idea of digital exclusion. It used to be the case in the past that people would say the rich countries can afford tech and the poor countries cannot. India is a living, breathing example of how tech has been deployed with DPI and the use cases that the government has done so brilliantly on how tech has solved the problem of digital exclusion and has actually been the means to deliver inclusion. On that topic, let me just focus on that a bit. About 12, 13 years ago, I was in Singapore on a Milken Institute seminar. Milken is Michael Milken. He made huge amounts of money shorting and hedge funds and all those very, very admirable things. And then he found, and then as most of them do, they built a foundation. Anyway, so long story short, there was a foundation and they were talking about democracy. And there was a panel on which I was invited to speak. And there were two other people on the panel. And the main case that they were making was that in Asia, democracies can never deliver. And the shining example of that was China and how a closed system, closed at least relative to any other democracy in Asia, was able to deliver growth, was able to deliver jobs and prosperity to its people in a way that India was not able to do. And India in 2012 was hardly the darling of the world, and it was every day was a scam, and every day was a story of runaway inflation and declining investments. And so they made a strong case that democracies in Asia cannot deliver for their people. It's a great celebration, it's an election, all that is fine, but effectively what people wanted, democracies couldn't deliver, and that you had to be a little authoritarian to be able to deliver. That was the case that was made. And anyway, I was in the minority. I tried to make a weak case. it was made weaker by the fact that the realities of India were certainly not helping me make any case. And I came back. But effectively, that narrative has been turned on its head by what India has done in the last 10 years, using tech today. And COVID is the greatest example in the history of, in my opinion, mankind, or history of the world, where technology was used to deliver not just vaccination and detect illness, but also to deliver the safety net of money and subsidies at a time when people were suffering and were the deepest trouble. So the point I'm making is that we have, as a nation, progressed significantly. We use open source platforms during the last 10 years. Nobody contested it. There was no need to go worry about whose tech it was and who will own it. India has taken its DPIs and offered it to the rest of the world free of cost, and many countries have embraced it. But the time that we are now living in, I think, driven a lot by the US view on tech and the perceived battle between the US and China on the future of tech, I think is going to trigger, catalyze, enable more and more feelings of tech sovereignty. And so this is my tech and you can use it, but I will tell you the terms on which we can use it. And that if that continues the way people are speaking about it today, then you certainly have a world where there will be tech haves and tech have-nots. And while countries like India will probably not be too impacted by that, but certainly countries in Africa, and I've traveled to over 11 countries in Africa after I demitted my office, they are deeply concerned about being shut out of the next decade of growth, opportunities, having their youth, having their youngsters participate in this next wave of change and next wave of entrepreneurship and opportunity. So that is certainly one big worry about what that will do. But today I was asked at the ATX Summit this question, and I said, if history and human behavior, and let's leave the US-China DeepSeek versus the US argument out to the side for a minute. But every cycle of tech started with somebody asserting his or her ownership on tech. So if you look at semiconductors, the Americans first said, no, I invented the transistor, I invented the semiconductors, and all the plants for semiconductors came up in the US. But slowly and surely it moved to other places as well. If you look at the compute cycle, it again originated Silicon Valley, the US, Microsoft, software and compute. It was America for a long time, and then it proliferated and the world grew. If you look at the internet and you look at telecom, wireless, it was Europe, it was GSM, closed technology, and then slowly that proliferated. So if you look at the history of tech and almost every super cycle, if you use that to predict the future, then I would say I'm not too worried. It will be an instinctive reaction of the Americans to say, no, my tech is my tech. And DeepSeek will say, my tech is my tech. But that eventually it will play itself out and that other countries will get into the mix. But however, there's one difference. The world today is not the world that it was for the last 50 years. And there is a lot more hostility. There's a lot more conflict, if not on the battlefield, but there's certainly trade and economic conflict. And there is certainly a general feeling geopolitically that this is not a positive sum where that everybody will be a winner. There will be some winners and there'll be some losers. So that zero-sum approach to tech, which is completely against the DNA of tech and against the DNA of technology history as it has played out so far, represents certainly a challenge for every country, including and not limited to India. And so therefore, that is certainly a problem to be thought about and discussed. The other issue is that for the first time in history, the talent that is required for this wave, this second wave, this coming wave of tech is almost clearly a different standard talent. This is a very important difference in this coming wave of tech and innovation. Up to now, if you were a coder, you knew Python, you knew a couple of other programming languages, you would be a pretty strong star in the tech ecosystem. But in this coming wave, it's not going to be enough. I mean, you are now talking about doctoral, postdoctoral, real research. And this is one of the things that the US has also realized, that the last decade and a half, their superstars in the US were Mark Zuckerberg, Amazon, all of these guys who were doing D2C brands and doing e-commerce and all of that. There were platforms. There was no deep tech. There was no research in that sense. And it is only after Elon Musk has come into the scene that deep tech, space, electronics, EVs, batteries, all of these cutting edge issues that are going to define the future of tech have suddenly come belatedly into the mainstream of American stock markets and American capital. So the talent that is required, and one of the things that I saw about DeepSeek, and I studied, not in any great detail, one of the things that some countries have done is really double down and focus in the last 5-6 years on this type of extraordinary levels of talent. And I'm a technologist myself, so when I say extraordinary levels of talent, I really mean extraordinary levels of talent. This is not for the faint-hearted, nor is this for the next wave for any average college graduate who's just done a BTech in engineering or a BTech. And one of the telling experiences that I had as a minister, I was pitching to every semicon company myself. So I would go, I had a PPT presentation, and I would present to Pat Gelsinger of Intel, TSMC executive staff. And one of the telling comments that I heard in a conversation, Morris Chang of TSMC was, forget about India. I mean, even the Americans don't understand what kind of talent you need to run a fab. So that is the nature of the talent gap or the talent requirements for this next wave of investments. And I always use this equation like a formulaic construction, which is that in this second wave, in this coming wave, investments will come to where the talent is, and talent will go to where the opportunities are. This is a simple algebraic 3-variable equation, which is economies will prosper if investments come in, investments will go where the talent is, and talent will go to where the opportunities are. And so there is going to be this battle for talent. So one is this tech sovereignty trend, and the second trend is going to be the battle almost to create talent and attract talent. And I must say, I'll share one personal experience with you, and then I'll stop. When I was minister and I was trying to attract diaspora back to India for semiconductors, I was reasonably successful. A lot of Indians who were from semiconductor industry came back because they could sense that we were building the fab and the real infrastructure was coming up, and there was a policy and a plan. When I tried towards the end, period of my ministership to get this talent for AI, nobody showed up. Because the bet or the assumption was, or the feeling was, that the AI compute capabilities were going to be centered around the US. And of course, this was before DeepSeek, and before DeepSeek demolished that argument that you needed huge amounts of capex and scale for AI. So these things, these two trends, I think, are going to be relevant, extremely important. India is in a good place, and one of the examples is, Tim Cook moving a significant part of the iPhone manufacturing from China to India, and that is not. And people who haven't understood iPhone manufacturing think it's just plain old assembly, but it is about the highest skill assembly, manufacturing, testing capabilities that you need to have a successful plant. And the fact that Indian talent could be ramped up so quickly, and over 80,000, 100,000 women, 80% of whom were women, were trained and deployed in these factories, just in a space of 2 years, from zero to about 20% of global production in a space of 3 years, is testimony, in a sense, to our talent in specialized niche areas of manufacturing as well. So I will leave it at that. It is certainly quite an exciting time to be in tech in any which form, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as an analyst, as a geopolitical student of geopolitics of tech. It is certainly pretty exciting times. And in this ATX summit, I don't know how many of you had occasion to go there, but the panel that I was on, there was the American ambassador, Steve Lang, was in it. It is clear that the battle lines are far from being clearly drawn, and that the winners and losers are still far from being decided. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar. I think you've laid out the terrain, and I think there are going to be a number of questions, and that are people are mulling over. Just if I could just pitch something, I have a number of questions, but I'm going to link one to where you ended, the issue of talent and skill. What is India doing now, and what can it do to ensure that it has that ability to generate that talent for the skills of tomorrow?
I don't know what I can't speak to what exactly is happening, but I certainly know that our Prime Minister is extremely focused and has been extremely focused on the issue of education and skills. But having said that, let me just tell you, this is an extraordinary departure from what we consider normal education, normal high quality education and skilling. Because for almost every aspect of deep tech talent, you need, as an enabling, almost an enabling, like an ecosystem, you need high quality research facilities, high quality professors. You need that to be built for somebody to go in there and excel. And this is, by the way, not unique to India. This is the same that's playing out in the US as well, every other part of the world, that the education system also has been caught a little unaware, and they are a bit nonplussed by how to react to the sudden surge in demand for talent. And they're not equipped for it, because you need, for example, semiconductor. You can't just teach semiconductor. You have to have labs. And these are expensive labs that cost $50-60 million each. You can't teach semiconductor design without having expensive, design tools. And these were never thought of, So this is this transition. It'll take. The smart institutes will make the transition fast, and the smart countries will do it fast, and they'll be the ones who succeed. So we are certainly determined. Our Prime Minister is very determined. When I was minister, we called it the second wave. We actually referred to this new wave of deep tech startups and a deep tech digital economy as the next wave. So I think the government is working on it.
I'm going to invite my colleague Karthik Nachiappan, who actually heads the Strategic Technologies Cluster at ICES. He's actually chairing a panel on geopolitics of tech in a few minutes, so
really?
I'm going to go to him first.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to hear you after seeing you on a lot of other mediums over the last few years. Just a couple of questions, just picking up on a couple of themes that you mentioned. First, on the geopolitics of tech. And look, I think broadly, So broadly the relationship between India and the United States over the last few years has been characterized by deep technological integration, right? And the trust has been formed that these are two countries that can work together on frontier and critical and emerging technologies for each other's mutual benefit. And the signals I'm getting from this current administration is that those sentiments are kind of gone, right? And the policies and the backing of big tech that this government is in the US is undertaking means that, look, it's basically gains for themselves at the expense of everybody else, right? And the sense that I get is that they're trying to push the interests of the big tech companies, irrespective of how and what other countries in the world are trying to regulate their own digital economies, right? And India has been able to manage this dynamic quite well, especially with the US. And I feel like we're moving into a time where I'm not sure whether the US is willing to listen or to at least understand the concerns of countries like India, who are also trying to develop their tech industries for their own benefit. It's just their interests and their benefit that they're looking at. How is India going to balance this after having developed such a deep relationship with the US over the last few years on this issue, on tech? The second question, and since you were the Minister of Electronics and Information Technology, I find that the importance of METI has grown considerably over the last few years in India as a regulator, as a ministry. But the kind of resources and the staffing given to METI has not grown relative to its importance in the economy and the kind of issues and areas that it covers. And do you think that will change over the next few years? Thank you.
No, look, I think we can safely assume, again, obviously this is not, nobody's quoting me outside this room, that multilateralism and sort of the warm, fuzzy, doing good for others while we do good for ourselves, that is dead and gone, at least for the moment. And I think self-interest really is now the primary political instinct in the US. It's always been that case in China, and certainly the case now in the US. What that does to the India-US relationship on the future of tech, whether it's quantum, whether it's AI, whether it's cyber, I can't predict. I can only hope that things don't change so dramatically, because then I think it's a lose-lose. This partnership can be win-win. Win-win not just for India and US, it can be win-win for the world. But from all my discussion with my friends across two oceans in the US, the instinct that is prevailing there is, look, we want it all, and we think we can do it, and there's not much you can do about it. And so while we are here, we might just grab it. So that's my assessment of it. How that'll evolve into India-US 2.0, I don't know. I mean, we have Mr. Piyush Goyal, who's a friend of mine, sitting there in Washington for the last few days trying to sort it out, or at least try to understand it. Look, METI, I think from 2015 onwards, when Prime Minister signaled to the country, to the government, that digital and tech and innovation is a significant part of his political strategy, METI gained strength, currency, and momentum. And that remains intact. Now, whether this issue is actually an existential question that is asked in every ministry, every government. How do you deal with these cutting edge opportunities and challenges while government remains pretty much the government? I mean, okay, we will argue that the government of Singapore is slightly more advanced and you have more talent in government. But pretty much every government around the world suffers the same problem. How do you regulate? How do you policy make? How do you encourage? How could you catalyze? How do you enable these cutting edge areas where you have to deal with a 28-year-old, 29-year-old postdoc who's going to disrupt every normal that we knew? And all we have on this side is an IAS officer, or at best, whose qualification is that he ran a district which is a Naxalite-prone district, or some other agriculture scheme or fund. So it is not an unusual problem. It is a challenge. And I think part of the reason I was given this opportunity to serve is my background. And the PM has managed to put, despite all of this, bolt on some pieces of talent at different points, at different places. But no government in the world will be able to deal with this as government. They'll have to co-opt into government as NGOs, as think tanks, as partners, the necessary talent that is required to make this ecosystem successful. And that's the case in METI and Government of India as well.
Thank you. I've already seen a few hands. So, Sandeep.
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. I have two questions. One this is more of, I'm hoping that since you were inside making many decisions, so you would
I'm
have a
outside
different-
now, just
Yeah.
FYI. Yeah.
But interesting perspective. One is that, as I understand it, India has tried several times from 1980s to get the semiconductor story going.
Yes.
I mean, Indira Gandhi time, they invested Semiconductor Complex Limited. There was a Rajiv Gandhi package that happened. Manmohan Singh government gave a lot of, there were a couple of policy pushes at least. So has there been an autopsy in the government? As you say that, still India was shut out of the whole supply chain for a very long time. Has there been an autopsy? What went wrong for so long? And was it all just policy, or were there structural factors? And how have they changed? And if I could just ask a second question,
Yeah,
you
sure.
mentioned the Apple deal, and clearly that is a big get for India. That is something that a lot of country would love to have. I'm just curious, how does a deal like that come about? What does it take to get Apple to invest in India? And especially, what are the major stakeholders at play? How much of the conversation happened with Cupertino and how much of it happened with Washington? I mean, how much of it was geopolitical and how much of it was business related? So whatever you, yeah.
Look, on semiconductor, the autopsy was done when I was minister, and it didn't take too long to do the autopsy. The answer is that we were never confident. We never believed that we were able to or capable of building and being part of a semiconductor ecosystem. It's as simple as that. In 1956, by the way, I found this out after I became minister. I don't know if anybody knows Fairchild Semiconductor, which is where Bob Noyce and all of these people were, made an offer to set up the first packaging unit in Asia, in India. And unfortunately, we were living in socialist la la land at that time. And so we said, no, this doesn't square with socialism. And so we denied that. In 2012, Intel, I worked at Intel, so I was tracking that at that time. I was an opposition MP. Intel wanted to set up a full-fledged fab in India, and the government of that time said, no, this is the wrong place to be in. Fab is not critical. Look, I mean, it may sound ridiculous now, but I mean, I'll tell you, 2014, if you had asked me that we were going to set up a fab in India and the Indian government is capable of actually attracting and investing and supporting, I would have said, whatever drink you had last night, check it. Because that there was no confidence. And the entire narrative of technology and innovation was about throwing headcount at a problem. No investment. It is basically, cost arbitrage, and that is how we build these IT companies, good, excellent companies. Today, and I say this not for exaggerating, as minister, I traveled to 71 universities around the country. None of the big ones, by the way, all the district colleges and universities. There is a totally different approach by students who are graduating from their undergraduate program or master's program towards entrepreneurship, towards tech. For almost a decade, 7 years, electronics enrollment in India was at a decline. I don't know if you know this. That when I was an engineer, to become an electronics engineer was the most difficult to do, because you would never get a vacancy, you would never get a seat. But for 6 to 7 years, people were preferring to go do computer coding and programming and abandoned electronics. And by the way, this is the same trend everywhere in the world. But that has now changed. So the autopsy is this, and it's a truth, it's a truism, that when you have political leadership, political vision, political clarity, and you define the ambition, if you define it, reimagine the ambition of a nation, and work hard to deliver on it, then the main actors in that ambition, which is the youngster, the people, the talent, they decide, yes, we can do it. So it's part psychological, part behavioral, part to the fact that the government was determined, made a commitment, and then delivered on it. So that is the autopsy. Uh, Otherwise, you can't explain why we set up SCL, it burned down, then we forgot about it for decades. And then when we reset it and rebuilt it, we built it with a absolutely flawed technology, 180 nanometer, when the world had moved to 28 and 40. So all of that. On Apple, there was no geopolitics at all. It was simply, and I say this with all seriousness, every investment, whether it's a Cisco investment or an Apple investment or a Lam Research investment or a ASML investment, will come in only if there is talent. And I will share with you what Tim Cook told me when he walked into my office in 2023. He said, when we came in and set up our first plant in India, we were absolutely full of trepidation. We didn't know. But the velocity with which we were able to build the talent pipeline amazed us. And that is what triggered confidence for us to expand. And today, the largest plant in ex-China in Asia is coming up outside Bangalore. That is Foxconn Apple plant. So nobody called anybody, and nobody called any number in Washington, D.C. They called numbers in Cupertino, and all the flight tickets were to San Francisco. Ivan?
First, thank you very much for coming to the Institute and for a very fascinating presentation. I have two questions for you. The first is, there is an institutional geostrategic basis to some of the US-India technological cooperation, ISET, Quad, and so on. So how much of this is still ongoing and working under the new circumstances that somebody alluded before? And my second question is, in many ways, obviously, many of these issues about digital sovereignty come down also to digital security. So how much do you think this is going to impact Indian technological trade with third parties? For example, I know that people in the Indian armed forces are now increasingly becoming concerned about Chinese chips, for example, in Russian technologies and these type of things. So this is a very broad topic, of course, but what's your take on it? Thank you.
No, the first question of ISET and Quad, I think that's the question you asked me as well, and I answered. I think, no, sorry, Karthik asked me. The dust on that hasn't settled. We don't know. Okay, and a lot of this will have to do with how the Americans deal with their partners on issues of tech. Are they prepared to share? Are they prepared to co-develop? Do they see the future of tech as something that they want to architect in a competition with China? Or do they see the race to architect the future of tech as a competition between China and America with other countries? So that they have to explain. There's no point me speculating. In 2018, when I was invited to speak at the Quad in Japan, we first put the idea of this, who will architect and who will decide the future of tech as an issue in the Quad. And I argued strongly at that point that no country must try and believe that it can do it on its own. It's not going to be possible. It's impossible. Even the Americans can't do it. I mean, even if they haven't realized it now, they'll realize it soon. That if it is not a coalition of like-minded democracies that get together in a trusted manner to shape the future of tech, somebody else will come and shape the future of tech. So that is the point I said then. That is the position that the government of India has then, and it's the position today. In terms of, like I said, ISET and Quad, we'll see how that work plays out. What was the second question you asked me? On the safety and trust. On yeah, look, let's look. The internet is ubiquitous. There is no boundaries. Think of AI and every other emerging technology as a layer on the internet. Now, the moment the internet has no boundaries and is not, you can't regulate that with the law of Singapore. I can't regulate the internet around the world. I can regulate it to the extent in Singapore. And that's easy to bypass because if all I have to do is get a VPN and I can bypass anything. Same way for India. So the primary point that I have been making and the government of India has made on these 3 AI safety summits is that countries have to come together and create a global framework. There is none right now. And that framework should deal not just with security and cybersecurity and cyber fraud, but also about criminality and harm. So, and I'll give you, this is a slightly nuanced subject, so I'll just take a little 2 minutes to explain. For example, in the US, the First Amendment protects free speech and it's an absolute right. And it is up to the prosecution to prove that what somebody is projecting as free speech is actually violative of some law or the other. For example, CSAM, child sexual abuse material. In the US, it is for the prosecutor to prove that it is CSAM. Now, the Indian Constitution and under Indian law, the right to expression is an Article 19 fundamental right. However, there are restrictions on it. You can't incite. You can't create law and order problems. You can't defame. So those are restrictions carved out in our Constitution. So if it fails the American test and it passes the Indian test, should it fail or should it pass? So there are these broad, at a high level abstract, the need for countries to harmonize a global framework of what is right and wrong. It's not enough for the Americans to say, this is our constitutional provision and it's right by our law and our provisions. So therefore, if it is right by our law, it has to be right in Singapore, it has to be right in the US, it has to be right in India, it has to be right elsewhere. That is point number one. So figuring out what is harm, what is wrong. The second is 85% of cyber fraud and cyber crimes, and this is a study we have done in India, I don't know what the number is multi-jurisdictional. So the victim is in a certain jurisdiction, the criminal is in a second jurisdiction. So let's, for an example, a phishing cyber fraud. Invariably, if the victim is in India, the jurisdiction of the criminal will be in some other country or in some other state within India. Now that requires again a sophisticated protocol and understanding of how to investigate, prosecute, and punitively punish. And today that doesn't happen. And the third, the fact that these are multi-jurisdictional and nobody is being identified and punished means there are state actors now who are running influence operations and misinformation operations against other states. So to your point, security from a fraud point of view, security from a trusted information point of view, security from a point of view of influence operations against a nation state. The current formulation, the current framework of understanding between countries does not deal with it, cannot deal with it. And there needs to be a new, either a framework or a new framework and an institution to deal with it. We had Interpol for the old style crimes. So think of this as some cyber version of that will have to evolve, but it will have to be, again, and I keep repeating this in every forum that I get an opportunity, that countries, at least 4 or 5 countries should come together and identify this as a challenge that they need to be able to meet. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go for Nishan first and I'll go for Nishan.
Firstly, thank you for a very insightful presentation. I just wanted to touch upon something you had mentioned, which is open source technology. I believe that in India, there are a lot of startups and other companies doing work, and they are moving, at least in the India-US relationship on the telecom side, they're talking about Open RAN and things like that. So is there a government policy, government approach, government's thinking on open source conceptually across technologies? Because I believe in chip design also there can be open source. And could you just...
No, we are completely, as a nation, as a country, completely, we believe in open source. When we use the word democratization of technology, I mean, apart from being a slogan, If you distill it down, democratization of technology means open source, i.e., it's not owned by anybody. It's not owned by an entity owned by the government of India. And this is very counter to the current instinct of let's say, the USA or current instinct of many other countries, where they actually go out now in public. And I was in the Paris AI Action Summit, where Professor Yoshua Bengio, I don't know if you know, University of Toronto, is a AI safety expert. He got onto a panel and I was sitting in front of him and he said, I'm opposed to open source. And so somebody asked him why. And he said, no, because the bad guys will get access to it. So then there was a follow-up question, which is a very reasonable common sense question, but who decides who's bad and who's good? Who's the bad guy and who's the good guy? It can't be that I own the technology and I decide you're bad and you won't get it and he's good and I'll give it to him and so on and so forth. So look, there was a resistance from OpenAI, there was a resistance from Gemini, Google Gemini, to make sure AI doesn't go the open source way. And that would have created haves and have-nots. My view is, and our government's view is, that it should be open source. It should be open source is the only way you democratize technology. However, along with that, to prevent this perception of bad guys misusing it, you have to have a global framework of guardrails, of do's and don'ts, legal do's and don'ts.
I think I have to take the last question now,
Yeah.
Avnish. The mic is just.
As CII, of course, this topic is very close to us. And as chief representative over here, we have been working with the Singaporean government also to advance this conversation on semiconductor talent exchange and knowledge exchange. Reason for that is through our conversation with the companies over here and our members over there, you'd be aware we have a task force on semiconductors at CII. So the feedback that came from our industry was that leave aside government and land requirements, the main issue is of finding actually managers who run those plants.
Talent, yes.
Talent.
That's what I said.
So we have been running capacity building programs on AI with in fact, with NUS, CII has a particular AI course where we take Indian industry, they come over here and do this.
Right.
Since we are now developing it, I just wanted to ask, in terms of doing these capacity building programs, and since you said it is quite technical, what could be the efficacy of doing such an engagement, and will it find actually value for us to engage on these lines?
No, look, I said this, somebody asked me yesterday, I don't recollect who, I don't know if it was somebody in our team or outside, about what I saw as the potential of Indo-Singapore collaboration on semiconductor. And I say this with all responsibility, I think it's one of the nuggets of opportunity. People underestimate what capabilities Singapore has in semiconductor. Everybody's, ASML, Lam Research, the Americans and the French and all of that. But actually there is great capability here. So there has to be an identification of these 3 or 4 companies that are doing great work here, especially on the manufacturing side. This manufacturing support side, the characterization of machines and all. I understand some, I don't know personally what the talent, what the capabilities are, but I've just read up on some. But the way to get those capabilities matched and linked and, sort of working with the Indian ecosystem is not by capacity building. It's by creating commercial linkages. This capacity building, I was a skills minister, so I've seen what capacity building can be if it's not done correctly. Capacity building in this area has to be in a plant. You can't have it in a classroom. You can't characterize a 28 nanometer lithography machine by putting 3 slides on on a PowerPoint. You have to go sit there in a clean room, sit there for 6 months, go from being a good electronics engineer to a good lithography supervisor. So that kind of like a pipeline of where they come, bring interns here, get trained. But the incentive for them will only be if they see a commercial opportunity in India. Otherwise, why will they do it? So that is how you to construct it. That's how it should be constructed. And I think there's a good opportunity with the Tata plant coming up in Gujarat. And there's a new plant coming up in Uttar Pradesh. So, yeah, I think that's the way you should approach it. Be a little go outside your regular comfort zone of CII, where you make presentations. I was FICCI president, so I know how industry associations do this. Not with any disrespect, but that's the extent of an industry association. But this is really about a commercial arrangement between the Indian ecosystem and the Singapore ecosystem. And part of the engagement of these ecosystems should be that you use the Singapore units and plants for training up talent, which, by the way, Singapore can use as well, because there's a general shortage of talent.
Just as information, that tomorrow, in fact, we're doing a very similar program.
Super.
About 50-55 suppliers from Singapore are coming in. Tata Electronics is giving a presentation. Foxconn is giving a presentation. Karnataka and Tamil Nadu are giving a
My
presentation.
job here is done.
Done.
Thank you.
You see how easy life can be.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
Well, I think Mr. Chandrasekhar, I think the note on which we kind of ended of potential strategic partnerships as compared to where we started from about competition, it's a good point to
Yeah,
bring a
absolutely.
closure to this conversation. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Please join me in thanking Mr.
Thank you.
Chandrasekhar.